Hello there. I am so glad that you're here tonight because I have been trying to get some of these ghost stories that relate to Christmas out for a few weeks now. I really love Christmas. I have four grandchildren that are here and it's so much fun and I'm just really into this. But I also like the spooky side of Christmas and I did not realize how widespread this is. When I started doing Paranormal Experienced over 10 years ago, gosh, who could ever figure that would happen, right? But I started finding out that just about every holiday has a little bit of woo, a little bit of spooky added to it. And it fascinated me because I did not really make that correlation, certainly not with Christmas. Um, but it's a big deal. And I had Mark Wiltz on with me last week, and he was absolutely so much fun. He's always a great educator for me. And he is one of three. Three of them are right there together at the best psychics I know. And on any given day, there are other people too. But when I've had Mark investigate with me, he's helped me with a case that I didn't really know what to do with because I don't channel. And channeling makes me a little uptight. So he came and did that for me. I didn't really expect that that would be his solution to that issue, but never doubt that Mark Foltz is going to bring the A game to anything that you do. So when I wanted to do a spooky Christmas show last week, he was my go-to, and we just went off on a tangent, and I'm like, but I want lots of spooky stories. So I've gone online. I found some of these we talked about, last week, but this one, I think this show is going to be dedicated probably to some that I was not familiar with. I've gone through. Really surprised by how many of these were written by women, but it's just an amazing thing to find that this is a deal. The Victorians were weird. Just going to put that out there. And they liked the oddities. And so to me, that was something that was an education in itself, right? And I think that it's really universal. We've got Christmas is historically celebrating the birth of Jesus, and which is a Christian moment, is what Christianity is based on. Actually, the crucifixion is probably what Christianity is based on, but without baby Jesus, there wouldn't be a crucifixion. So we celebrate the birth of Jesus because that's who came through and saved us. So I was really surprised by all this stuff. And I do want to say that the ghost ship on the banner was created by Fnata. Oh my goodness. I hope Stua. Fnata Stua. And I used that because ghost ships are one of my favorite things also. Hey, Lori. And a good friend of mine, Captain Rob, who took me with him for his birthday celebration to do a Walking Dead thing. That was fun. Captain Rob knows everybody. He is based in Amsterdam or outside of Amsterdam. He built a ship out of popsicle sticks with some children that he worked with at a hospital. And they sailed it. It hit something in the water. They had to go back. But from popsicle sticks, he's amazing. And he's a retired stuntman. He left, what is it with me and stuntmen, right? Hello, Rick McCullum. But when I met him, I didn't know what to make of him. He is the kindest man with the biggest heart for sick children. Also a stuntman thing, Rick McCullum, um, who became such a good friend to me. And then when the Ukrainian war broke out, Rob was going. His wife is a physician. She teaches other people to be doctors, and they were bringing children out of Ukraine through Poland and bringing them back to safety. And I'm absolutely certain some of those children are waiting still. They're aging. That's something that hits my heart really hard. I'm sorry. But that's a situation that we should all be really supporting too, because it's such an imperative to take care of the next generation. And I can't imagine the bravery of those parents whose priority is getting their children safe. So, didn't expect to go there. That's okay. But I think that getting to learn more about these stories was really something that I didn't expect, because one of the things that I found is a local magazine, which is one of my favorites. I'm a subscriber, but it's called Mental Floss. And Mental Floss has all kinds of things. It's been in publication for a while, not as long as Fate by any means of the words, but they did an absolute jam up job with their edition this month. And so it's 10 classic scary stories to read for Christmas that are not a Christmas Carol. And if you stop and think about it, there have been so many versions on film, on stage, of A Christmas Carol that you'll never run out of things to watch if you're looking for that, right? But yeah, it's not really something that's done today per se, unless you're a weirdo like me that's trying to do this. But in the Victorian era, gathering around the fireplace to tell these ghost stories was just a tradition. And it was so interesting to me to find out that that's what they did. I'm not even talking about Krampus, which we'll get to, but it's just what they did for their holidays. And how the connection between Christmas and the paranormal came to be is really not known, but they think it went a lot farther back than the 19th century. Yeah, this winter solstice, which, just before Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it's long been a time, or considered a time, when the barrier between the living and the dead, the barrier's weak. The veil is thin. And so it's probably just something that was passed down as the kind of continuity of the pagan holiday coinciding with the Christian one. And it's just kind of wild. But there's some really good stories. Obviously, some of them are long. I'm not going to read them all to you. But, you've got The Ash Tree by Montague. Rhodes James, and he actually goes by MR. But he's an English scholar and a medievalist, and he was the vice chancellor of England's Cambridge University in the mid 1910s. His work and research as an academic remains significant today, but as the writer of ghost stories, he published several volumes of his creepy tales, and he just shared them through his whole life. But the ash tree, and I'm going to quote Mental Floss through a lot of this because thank you to them. But the ash tree is an especially unnerving tale that was one of 8 stories included in his first collection of Spooky Tales Ghost Stories of an Antiquary in 1904. And it starts in the late 1600s with the trial and eventual execution of a mysterious woman named Mrs. Mothersole, accused of witchcraft in a remote village in rural East England. And her mysterious last words, "There will be guests at the hall," soon proved ominously true when the local squire who brought charges against her dies at his home under questionable circumstances. And, I really, these people in this period, especially, you had this was in England, and all through England, Scotland was bad. Scotland was our Salem. The witch trials were hideous. And what the women went through were pretty much worse than what happened here. And that is saying something, as anyone who has studied this knows. But I find it interesting that an English author went there because it's like fantasy and horror classics. The Ash Tree by M.R. James is the book that this is in. And yes, I read it. Yes, it's good. And one of the things that we have, and I actually have the PDF of this. It's pretty long. But, I love to read and I love to share. So we may go there. You never know. But the book is called The Kit Bag by Algernon Blackwood. And he was one of the best known authors of supernatural stories in the early 1900s. He also became known as a broadcaster who would read spooky tales on television, British radio and television. So The Kit Bag was one of his earlier published stories, and it was published in 1908. And the story concerns a young English barrister who, in the aftermath of a gruesome murder trial, at which he was called upon to defend the murderer, begins to pack a bag in preparation for a much-needed Christmas holiday, only to discover things might not be quite as they seem. So, good times. And I just think that who knew? I mean, I did know the Victorians, that was such a very weird period for the time frame. I mean, from what we think about for that time frame, they were loosey-goosey. I mean, a little bit weird, a little bit funky, but terrible hair. But it was just one of those things that I had no idea that they were quite into the macabre like they are. And it's just, it's interesting. Weird, but interesting. And then another one from this era, Between the Lights by E.F. Benson. He did comics, Map and Lucia series of novels satirizing the lives of the upper middle classes. And but he wrote a lot of supernatural stories, publishing several anthologies. And Between the Lights, first published, was in his 1912 collection, and The Room in the Tower and Other Stories. set in a quintessentially spooky mansion in the English countryside at Christmas time. And it's fascinating. And then, of course, me. You probably heard Mark Boltz and I talk about this one last week. Alfred McClelland Barrage became well known in the early 1900s as the writer of a series of detective books for boys. And he published that under the pseudonym of Frank Leland. But it is as a prolific writer of ghost and supernatural literature that he is arguably best remembered. His 1931 tells me, and I'm going to tell you this story. I read this for the first time. I don't think I was in high school yet. I've always loved to read. But anyway, it was first published in the anthology Someone in the Room. It's a classic example of a story within a story, and it's where a party guest on Christmas Eve recalls Christmas from his past, where 12 friends found that a mysterious 13th had joined a game of festive hide and go seek. Not everybody was found the way they needed to be. So, but seriously, if you get a chance and you're really into ghost stories and spookiness and just plain, woo, you got to read it. It's SMEE, and it's by A.M. Barrage, Burrage, and it's a great story. It actually was a Victorian game. It's they would have house parties, and it was a great game if you were kind of sparking with somebody, because you could be, if your person of interest was who found you, while y'all were waiting on somebody else to find y'all, there might be a little smoochy woochies going on there, which was not really accepted as a standard practice, right? But the story is really good. And it's really one of those things that puts you off, But something else that I did not know this about Dickens, right? But it's really an interesting thing because he did another Christmas story, and it's called The Haunted Man. And it's just weird. It is weird. But it says, Christmas is a time in which the memory of every remediable sorrow, wrong, and trouble in the world around us should be active with us. Realizes the eponymously haunted Mr. Redlaw in the last of Dickens' 5 Christmas novellas, The Haunted Man. And this is from 1848. I mean, these people were really grieving on this stuff, right? But the tale features a man haunted by an apparition that looks like his exact double. So he's got a doppelganger, right? But it's an apparition. Live performances of the tale in Dickens' day proved a sensation thanks to their use of a Pepper's ghost, a theatrical technique that allowed the story's ghost to be projected live on the stage. I mean, we are talking the 1800s, right? Who knew they could do that? Did you? Because I did not. That was trippy to me. And I just did not even know. So, but doppelgangers and projecting ghosts in the 1800s, early 1800s, was cool. And then A Strange Christmas Game by J.H. Riddell. This was a woman, okay? Charlotte Riddell. She was a Victorian writer of ghost stories. She wrote tons of them. And due to the male-dominated nature of publishing, most of her tales are under pseudonyms, masculine pseudonyms. And when she did J.H. Riddell for A Strange Christmas Game in 1863, that was actually her husband's name. So, but the story concerns a brother and sister who inherit a supposedly haunted house, haunted mansion, excuse me, in which the original owner long ago suffered a mysterious fate following a festive game of cards. That might be a little weird, right? But when I said a lot of these were written by women, there was a lot of that frowned on. A, it was spooky, which could lead to a witchcraft thought being put in someone's head. And, you know, Lori's in chat and she knows some of the stories about what it was like for these women who were charged. It's a great way to get rid of a wife, just like in Salem. But the tortures that they used there were horrific, and I'm certain that probably spread down into England too. I just can't imagine the ability to be that cruel to other people, and I'm glad I can't. I don't understand. I don't understand how somebody can be that person, and I hope I never will. I don't like blood. I don't like gore. I don't like, people in pain. I'm an empath. I feel that. And my own is bad enough. I don't need other people's because it's bad. Empaths listening will know that. But anyway, I digress because you know what? I'm just going to be standing there with, something under my feet. But number 90 by B.M. Kroger. It's number 90 and Other Ghost Stories is an actual name of the book. And Richard Dalby's Mistresses of the Macabre, Volume 3. But the prolific Irish-born author Bithia Mary Kroger, arguably best known in the 19th century for her romantic society dramas, many of which set during Britain's rule of India, which, by the way, is a very interesting period to read about. Just saying. But even the Victorian Prime Minister, William Gladstone, was once spotted reading one. But a lot of her short stories, shorter fiction, was made up of wintertime ghost stories, including the fiercely unnerving tale of Number 90. The title is a number of a supposed haunted house in Charleston, South Carolina, where my daughter lives. I'm going to go find that. In which a friend of the narrator, John Hollyoake, gamely agrees to spend Christmas night both to prove the non-existence of ghosts and to dispel the local rumors of its haunting. Hollyoake, however, soon discovers that the house's spirits are very much real, but rather than be put off, he confronts them and then bravely returns to Number 90 the following night to get to the bottom of the hauntings, at which point things do not go quite as he had thought they would. And, again, a shout out to Mental Floss because their writers have put together this compilation and they're brilliant. They're brilliant. I am just blown away that great minds run together, right? Again, if you don't read this magazine, after you buy your Fate magazine, you need to buy this magazine. It's brilliant. It really is. It's got so much information. And then I don't know how to pronounce this. Okay, well, I'm going to do this one first. All Souls by Edith Wharton. And although it's not set at Christmas, it's a bitterly cold weekend in October. And It's got enough wintry settings, right? So it's good for sitting by the fire. But the tale concerns a woman named Miss Claiborne who is bedbound from a twisted ankle. And so she's recovering from that, and she's out in the big country house. And she wakes up one morning to find everybody else gone. The staff's gone, the doctor's gone, nobody's there. But perhaps there's a mysterious presence in their place. I think stuff like that's creepy. It brings to mind all kinds of horror movies that I don't watch. I'm such a dweeb. I don't like horror. Empath gets to me. Um, and then, you know, I am going to get to reading some of them, but I just wanted to share some of these with you first because who knew there were this many? To be quite honest, I didn't. And I'm just blown away. I am so blown away. But we've got The Ghost Summons by Ada Bissom, Bussom. And her sister was a suffragist and Australian women's rights campaigner. So, but she didn't have much time on Earth. And she read a lot of short stories and a novel. There was a novel as well, many of which were published in the Victorian literary magazine Belgravia. And if you could find an old copy of that, look at your library. You won't be able to take it, but you can look at it. But the Belgravia was a really terrific magazine as well. So, but among those stories that she had published in Belgravia was The Ghost Summons, and it was published posthumously. And it begins with a young doctor sitting down to a terribly lonely meal at Christmas time when a mysterious, pale-looking stranger arrives at his surgery convinced that he is going to die that evening precisely at 1 a.m. So the patient offers the doctor an opportunity he finds impossible to turn down, or a fee of £1,000. All he needs to do is sit by his bedside to attend to his death. When the fateful hour arrives, the doctor witnesses something more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. So that's not really my color Kool-Aid. Again, I'm a great big dweeb when it comes to horror, which is amazing because I have so many horror actor friends, but there's that. But, it's really, when you think about the mindset, these people had no television, they had no movies, they had other, writings that they could read. If they had an education, they could read. And otherwise, the stories are just passed down, word of mouth. And it was so interesting to me that some of these things actually made it into history, into classic literature. I've read books from the 1700s. I've read Buddhist writings from earlier than that. And, we always think that we're so advanced and that we're doing, things that nobody's ever seen done before. And it really is a case of everything old is new again, including horror, including, fan fiction, basically, including, ghost stories and everything old is new again. Music. People are writing more intricate music than we ever see really done now, although there is a very strong push among modern classical style music that's being published now. It's brilliant. And if you like classical music, start looking at some of these young guys that are and girls who are putting this stuff out. It's so much fun. And, you can change somebody else's world by going and listening to it and sharing it too. So it's just a lot of fun. And so Edith Nesbit. Edith Nesbit is the Victorian author. She went by E. Nesbit, so she should be published. But she is the author of a lot of children's stories, classic turn of the last century ones. The Railway Children, Five Children. It's pretty amazing. But alongside of that, she wrote a lot of classic ghost stories. And the Festive Tale of the Shadow. The Shadow is such a good story. You need to read that. But the Man Size and Marble, I have not yet read, but I'm gonna, because it says it's chilling. So The Shadow begins at a Christmas party where a group of women are telling one another, spooky tales. And then they invite the housekeeper to join their game, but she regales them with the tale of a mysterious shadow that haunted the home of an old friend, and which, it soon transpires, might not entirely have been left in the past. How fun is that? But it's just really pretty cool that these things are out there. I am just slayed. I'm going to let's see, that's the wrong one. I'm trying to find this kit bag. This kit bag, it's a little long, but I might just read you a few pages of it. Do you want to hear that? Laura, you want to hear that? So let me go and see if I can't find that. But you can go online and find some of these things that this one to me does not sound so stiff, right? A lot of the writing to me in this period is kind of rigid because of how they spoke. Very proper sometimes, but this is The Kit Bag by Algernon Blackwood. When the words "not guilty" sounded through the crowded courtroom that dark December afternoon, Arthur Wilbraham, the great criminal K.C., King's Court, and leader for the triumphant defense, was represented by his junior, but Johnson, his private secretary, carried the verdict across to his chambers like lightning. "It's what we expected, I think," the barrister said without emotion. "And personally, I am glad the case is over. There is no particular sign of pleasure that his defense of John Turk, the murderer, on a plea of insanity had been successful. For no doubt he felt, as everyone who had watched the case felt, that no man had ever better deserved the gallows." "I'm glad too," said Johnson. He sat in the court for 10 days, watching the face of the man who had carried out with callous detail one of the most brutal and cold-blooded murders of recent years. The counsel glanced up at his secretary. They were more than employer and employed. For family and other reasons, they were friends. "Ah, I remember, yes," he said with a kind smile. "And you want to get away for Christmas. You're going to skate and ski in the Alps, aren't you? If I was your age, I'd come with you." Johnson laughed shortly. He was a young man of 26 with a delicate face like a girl's. "I can catch the morning boat now," he said, "but that's not the reason I'm glad the trial is over. I'm glad it's over because I've seen the last of that man's dreadful face. It positively haunted me. Bat white skin with the black hair brushed low over the forehead is a thing I shall never forget. And the description of the way the dismembered body was crammed and packed with lime into that—" "Don't dwell on it, my dear fellow," interrupted the other, looking at him curiously out of his keen eyes. "Don't think about it. Such pictures have a trick of coming back when one least wants at least wants them. He paused a moment. Now go, he added presently, and enjoy your holiday. And I have got a battery thing, so bear with me. I got to get this in here. Okay. But I shall want all your energy for my parliamentary work when you get back, and don't break your neck skiing. Johnson shook hands and took his leave. At the door, he turned suddenly. I knew there was something I wanted to ask you, he said. Would you mind lending me one of your kit bags? It's too late to get one tonight, and I'll leave in the morning before the shops are open. Of course, I'll send Henry over with it to your homes. You shall have it the moment I get home. I promise to take great care of it, said Johnson gratefully, delighted to think that within 30 hours he'd be nearing the brilliant sunshine of the high Alps in winter. I wouldn't mind that. The thought of that criminal court was like an evil dream in his mind. He dined at his club and went on to Bloomsbury, where he occupied the top floor in one of those old gaunt houses in which rooms are large and lofty. The floor below his own was vacant and unfurnished, and below that were other lodgers who he did not know. It was cheerless, and he looked forward heartily to a change. The night was even more cheerless. It was miserable, and few people were out. A cold, sleety rain was driving down the streets before the keenest east wind he had ever felt. It howled dismally among the big, gloomy houses of the great squares. And when he reached his rooms, he heard it whistling and shouting over the world of black roofs beyond his windows. In the hall, he met his landlady, shading a candle from the draughts with her thin hand. This come by a man from Mr. Wilbraham's, sir. She pointed to what was evidently the kit bag, and Johnson thanked her and took it upstairs with him. I shall be going abroad in the morning for 10 days, Mrs. Monks. I'll leave an address for letters. And I hope you'll have a Merry Christmas, sir, she said in a raucous, wheezy voice that suggested spirits, and better weather than this. I hope so, too, replied her lodger, shuddering a little as the wind went roaring down the street outside. When he got upstairs, he heard the sleet volleying against the window panes. He put his kettle on to make a cup of hot coffee, and then set about putting a few things in order for his absence. And now I must pack. Such as my packing is, he laughed to himself and set to work at once. He liked the He liked the packing, for it brought the snow mountains so vividly before him and made him forget the unpleasantness in the scenes of the past 10 days. Besides, it was not elaborate in nature. His friend had lent him the very thing, a stout canvas kit bag, sack-shaped, with holes around the neck for the brass bar and padlock. It was a bit shapeless, true, and not much to look at, but its capacity was unlimited, my favorite luggage. And there was no need to pack carefully. He shoved his waterproof coat, his fur cap and gloves, his skates and climbing boots, his sweaters, snow boots, and ear caps, and then on top of these he piled his woolen shirts and underwear, his thick socks, puttees, I don't know what that is, and knickerbockers. Do you know what those are? The dress suit came next in case the hotel people dressed for dinner, and then, thinking of the best way to pack his white shirts, he paused a moment to reflect. That's the worst of these kit bags, he mused vaguely, standing in the center of the sitting room where he had come to fetch some string. It was after 10 o'clock. A furious gust of wind rattled the windows as though to hurry him up, and he thought with pity of the poor Londoners whose Christmas would be spent in such a climate, whilst he was skimming over snowy slopes and bright sunshine, and dancing in the evening with rosy-cheeked girls. Ah, that reminded him he must put his dancing pumps and evening socks in. He crossed over from his sitting room to the cupboard on the landing where he kept his linen. Then he heard someone coming softly up the stairs. He stood for a moment on the landing to listen. It was Mrs. Monk's step, he thought. She must be coming up with the last post. But then the steps ceased suddenly, and he heard no more. They were at least 2 flights down, and he came to the conclusion that they were too heavy to be those of his bibulous landlady. No doubt they belonged to a late lodger who had mistaken his floor. He went to his bedroom and packed his pumps and dress shirts as best he could. The kit bag by this time was 2/3 full and stood upright on its own base, like a sack of flour. For the first time, he noticed that it was old and dirty, the canvas faded and worn, that it had obviously been subjected to rather rough treatment. It was not a very nice bag to have sent him, certainly not a new one or one that his chief valued. He gave the matter a passing thought and went on with his packing. Once or twice he found himself wondering who could have been wandering down below, for Mrs. Monks had not come up with letters and the floor was empty and unfurnished. From time to time, moreover, he was almost certain he heard a soft tread of someone padding over the bare boards, cautiously, stealthily, as silently as possible, and further, that the sounds had been lately coming distinctly nearer. For the first time in his life, he began to feel a little creepy. Then, as though to emphasize this feeling, the odd thing happened as he left the bedroom. Having just packed his recalcitrant white shirts, he noticed that the top of the kick pad locked over toward him with an extraordinary resemblance to a human face. The canvas fell into a fold like a nose and forehead, and the brass rings for the padlocks just filled the position of the eyes. A shadow, or was it a travel stain, for he could not tell exactly, looked like hair. It gave him rather a turn, for it was so absurdly, so outrageously like the face of John Turk, the murderer. He laughed and went into the front room, where the light was stronger. That horrid case has got on my mind, he thought. I shall be glad of a change of scene and air. In the sitting room, however, he was not pleased to hear again that stealthy tread upon the stairs, and to realize that it was much closer than before, as well as unmistakably real. And this time he got up and went out to see who it could be creeping about on the upper staircase at so late an hour. But the sound ceased. There was no one visible on the stairs. He went to the floor below, but not without trepidation, and turned on the electric light to make sure that no one was hiding in the empty rooms of the unoccupied suite. There was not a stick of furniture large enough to hide a dog. Then he called over the banisters to Mrs. Monks, but there was no answer, and his voice echoed down into the dark vault of the house and was lost in the roar of the gale that howled outside. Everyone was in bed and asleep. Everyone except himself and the owner of this soft and steady tread. My absurd imagination, I suppose, he thought. It must have been the wind after all, although it seemed so very real and close. I thought. He went back to his packing. It was by this time getting on toward midnight. He drank his coffee up and lit another pipe, the last before turning in. It's difficult to say exactly at what point fear begins, when the causes of that fear are not plainly before the eyes. Impressions gather on the surface of the mind, film by film, as ice gathers upon the surface of still water, but often so lightly that they claim no definite recognition from the consciousness. Then a point is reached where the accumulated impressions become a definite emotion, and the mind realizes that something has happened. With something of a start, Johnson suddenly recognized that he felt nervous, oddly nervous also, that for some time past, the causes of this feeling had been gathering slowly in his mind, but that he only just reached the point where he was forced to acknowledge them. You want me to go on? Because it's about to get deep. Okay. He felt as though he were doing something that was strongly objected to by another person. Another person, moreover, who had some right to object. It was a most disturbing and agreeable feeling, not unlike the persistent promptings of conscience, almost, in fact, as if he were doing something he knew to be wrong. Yet, though he searched vigorously and honestly in his mind, he could nowhere lay his finger upon the secret of this growing uneasiness, and it perplexed him. More, it distressed and frightened him. Pure nerves, I suppose, he said aloud with a forced laugh. Mountain air will cure that. Ah, he added, still speaking to himself, and that reminds me, my snow glasses. He was standing by the door of the bedroom towards the sitting room. No, he was standing by the door of the bedroom during this brief soliloquy, and as he quickly passed toward the sitting room to fetch them from the cupboard, he saw out of the corner of his eye the indistinct outline of a figure standing on the stairs, a few feet from the top. It was someone in a stooping position, with one hand on the banisters, and the face peering up towards the landing. At the same moment, he heard a shuffling footstep. The person who had been creeping about below all this time had at last come up to his own floor. Who in the world could it be? And what in the name of heaven did he want? Johnson caught his breath sharply and stood stock still. Then, after a few seconds' hesitation, he found his courage and turned to investigate. But he saw to his utter amazement, the stairs were empty. There was no one. He felt a series of cold shivers run over him, and something about the muscles of his legs gave a little and grew weak. For the space of several minutes, he peered steadily into the shadows that congregated about the top of the staircase where he had seen the figure. And then he walked fast, almost ran, in fact, into the light of the front room, but hardly had he passed inside the doorway, he heard someone come up the stairs behind him with a quick bound and go swiftly into his bedroom. It was heavy, but at the same time a stealthy footstep, the tread of someone who did not want to be seen. And it was at this precise moment that the nervousness he had hitherto experienced leapt the boundary line and entered a state of fear, almost of acute, unreasonable fear. But before it turned into terror, there was a further boundary to cross, and beyond that again lay the region of pure horror. Johnson's position was an unenviable one. By Jove, that was someone on the stairs then, he muttered, his flesh crawling all over. And whoever it was has now gone into my bedroom. His delicate, pale face turned absurdly white, and for some minutes he hardly knew what to do or think. Then he realized intuitively that delay only set a premium upon fear, and he crossed the landing boldly and went straight into the other room, where but a few seconds before the steps had disappeared. "Who's there? Is that you, Mrs. Monks?" he called aloud as he went, and heard the first half of his words echo down the empty stairs, while the second half fell dead against the curtains in a room that apparently held no other human figure than his own. "Who's there?" he called again, in a voice unnecessarily loud, and that only just held firm. "What do you want here?" The curtain swayed very slightly, and as he saw it, his heart felt as if it almost missed a beat. Yet he dashed forward and drew them aside with a rush. A window, streaming with rain, was all that met his gaze. He continued his search, but in vain. The cupboards held nothing but rows of clothes hanging motionless, and under the bed there was no sign of anyone hiding. He stepped backward into the middle of the room, and as he did so, something all but tripped him up. Turning with a sudden spring of alarm, he saw the kit bag. Odd, he thought. That's not where I left it. A few minutes before it had been surely on his right, between the bed and the bath. He did not remember having moved it. It was very curious. What in the world was the matter with everything? Were all his senses gone queer? The terrific gust of wind tore at the windows, dashing the sleet against the glass with the force of a small gunshot, and then fled away, howling dismally over the wasted Bloomsbury roofs. A sudden vision of the Channel next day rose in his mind and recalled him sharp to realities. "There's no one here at any rate. That's quite clear," he exclaimed aloud. Yet at the time he uttered them, he knew perfectly well that his words were not true, and he did not believe them himself. He felt exactly as though someone was hiding close about him, watching all his movements, trying hard to hinder his packing in some way. "And two of my senses," he added, keeping up a pretense, "have played me the most absurd tricks. The steps I heard and the figure I saw were both entirely imaginary." He went back to the front room, poked the fire into a blaze, and sat down before it to think. What impressed him more than anything else was the fact that the kit bag was no longer where he had left it. It had been dragged nearer to the door. What happened afterward that night happened, of course, to a man already excited by fear, and was perceived by a man that had not the full and proper control, therefore, of the senses. Outwardly, Johnson remained calm and master of himself to the end, pretending to the very last that everything he witnessed had a natural explanation, or was merely delusions of his tired nerves. But inwardly, in his very heart, he knew all along that someone had been hiding downstairs in the empty suite when he came in, that this person had watched his opportunity and then stealthily made his way up to the bedroom, and that all he saw and heard afterwards, from the moving of the kit bag to, well, to the other things the story has to tell, were caused directly by the presence of this invisible person. And it was here, just when he most desired to keep his mind and thoughts controlled, that the vivid pictures received day after day upon the mental plates exposed in the courtroom of the Old Bailey came strongly to light, and developed themselves in the dark room of his inner vision. Unpleasant, haunting memories have a way of coming to life again just when the mind least desires them. In the silent watches of the night, on sleepless pillows, during the lonely hours spent by sick and dying beds. So now, in the same way, Johnson saw nothing but the dreadful face of John Turk, the murderer, lowering at him from every corner of his mental field of vision. The white skin, the evil eyes, and the fringe of black hair low over the forehead. All the pictures of those 10 days in court crowded back into his mind unbidden and very vivid. "This is all rubbish and nerves," he exclaimed at length, springing with sudden energy from his chair. "I shall finish my packing and go to bed. I'm overwrought, overtired. No doubt at this rate I shall hear steps and things all night." But his face was deadly white all the same. He snatched up his field glasses and walked across to the bedroom, humming a music hall song as he went, a trifle too loud to be natural, and the instant he crossed the threshold and stood within the room, something turned cold in his heart, and he felt that every hair on his head stood up. The kit bag lay close in front of him, several feet nearer to the door than he had left it, and just over its crumpled top, he saw a face and head slowly sinking down out of sight, as though someone were crouching down behind it to hide. And at the same moment, a sound like a long-drawn sigh was distinctly audible in the still air about him between the gusts of the storm outside. Johnson had more courage and willpower than the girlish indecision on his face indicated. But at first such a wave of terror came over him that for some seconds he could do nothing but stand and stare. A violent trembling ran down his back and legs, and he was conscious of a foolish, almost hysterical impulse to scream aloud. That sigh seemed in his very ear, and the air still quivered with it. It was unmistakably a human sigh. "Who's there?" he said at length, finding his voice, but thought he meant to speak with loud decision. That should be though. He meant to speak with loud decision. The tones came out instead in a faint whisper, for he had partly lost the control of tongue and lips. He stepped forward so he could see all around and over the kit bag. Of course, there was nothing there, nothing but the faded carpet and the bulging canvas sides. He put out his hands and threw up in the mouth of the sack where it had fallen over, being only 3 parts full, and he saw for the first time that round the inside, some 6 inches from the top, there was a broad smear of dull crimson. It was an old and faded blood stain. He uttered a scream and drew back his hands as if they had been burnt. At the same moment, the kit bag gave a faint but unmistakable lurch forwards toward the door. Johnson collapsed backwards, searching with his hands for the support of something solid, and the door, being further behind him than he realized, received his weight just in time to prevent his falling, and shut to with a resounding bang. At the same moment, the swinging of his left arm accidentally touched the electric switch, and the light in the room went out. It was an awkward and disagreeable predicament, and if Johnson had not been possessed of real pluck, he might have done all manner of foolish things. As it was, however, he pulled himself together and groped furiously for the little brass knob to turn the light on again. But the rapid closing of the door had set the coats hanging on it in a swinging, and his fingers became entangled in confusion of sleeves and pockets, So there were some moments before he found the switch. And in those few moments of bewilderment and terror, two things happened that sent him beyond recall over the boundary into the region of genuine horror. He distinctly heard the kit bag shuffling heavily across the floor in jerks, and close in front of his face sounded once again the sigh of a human being. In his anguished efforts to find the brass button on the wall, he nearly scraped the nails from his fingers. But even then, in those frenzied moments of alarm, so swift and alert are the impressions of a man keyed up by a vivid emotion, he had time to realize that he dreaded the return of the light, and that it might be better for him to stay hidden in the merciful screen of darkness. It was but the impulse of movement, however, and before he had time to act upon it, he had yielded automatically to the original desire, and the room was flooded again with light. But the second instinct had been right. It would have been better for him to sit in the shelter of kind darkness. For there, close before him, bending over the half-packed kit bag, clear as life and the merciless glare of the electric light, stood the figure of John Turk, the murderer. Not 3 feet from him, the man stood, the fringe of his black hair marked plainly against the pallor of his forehead, and the whole horrible presentment of the scoundrel as vivid as he had seen him day after day in the Old Bailey when he stood there in the dock, cynical and callous under the very shadow of the gallows. In a flash, Johnson realized what it all meant. The dirty and much-used bag, the smear of crimson within the top, the dreadful stretched condition of the bulging sides. He remembered how the victim's body had been stuffed into a canvas bag for burial. The ghastly, dismembered fragments forced with lime into this very bag, and the bag itself produced as evidence. It all came back to him as clear as day. Very softly and stealthily, his hand gripped behind him for the handle of the door. But before he could turn it, the very thing he most of all dreaded came about, and John Turk lifted his devil's face and looked at him. At the same moment, the heavy sigh passed through the air of the room, formulated somehow into words. "It's my bag, and I want it." Johnson just remembered clawing the door open, and then falling a heap on the floor of the landing as he tried frantically to make his way into the front room. He remained unconscious for a long time, and it was still dark when he opened his eyes and realized that he was lying stiff and brave on the cold boards. Then the memory of what he had seen rushed back into his mind, and he promptly fainted again. When he woke up the second time, the wintry dawn was beginning to creep into the windows and painting the stars a cheerless, dismal gray, and he managed to crawl into the front room and cover himself with an overcoat in the armchair, where at length he fell asleep. A great clamor woke him. His voice, loud and audible. "What? You ain't been to bed, sir. Are you ill, or has anything happened? And there's an urgent gentleman to see you, though it ain't 7 o'clock yet." And "Who is it?" he stammered. "I'm all right, thanks. Fell asleep in my chair, I suppose." "Someone from Mr. Wilbram's, and he says he ought to see you quick before you go abroad, and I told him." "Show him up, please, at once," said Johnson, whose head was whirling, and his mind was full of dreadful visions. Mr. Wilbraham's man came in with many apologies, and explained briefly and quickly that an absurd mistake had been made, and that the wrong kit bag had been sent over the night before. Henry somehow got hold of the one that came over from the courtroom, and Mr. Wilbraham only discovered it when he saw his own lying in his room and asked why it had not gone to you, the man said. "Oh," said Johnson stupidly. "And he must have brought you the one from the murder case instead, sir, I'm afraid," the man continued, without the ghost of an expression on his face. "The one John Turk packed the dead both in. Mr. Wilbraham's awful upset about it, sir, and told me to come over first thing this morning with the right one as you were leaving by the boat." He pointed to the clean-looking one on the floor, which he had just brought. "And I was to bring the other one back, sir," he added casually. For some minutes, Johnson could not find his voice. At last he pointed in the direction of his bedroom and said, "Perhaps you would kindly unpack it for me. Just empty the things out on the floor." The man disappeared into the other room and was gone for 5 minutes. Johnson heard the shifting to and fro of the bag and the rattle of the skates and boots being unpacked. Thank you, sir, the man said, returning with the bag folded over his arm. And anything more I can do to help you, sir? What is it? Asked Johnson, saying that he still had something he wished to say. Beg pardon, sir, but knowing your interest in the Turk case, I thought you'd maybe like to know what's happened. Yes. John Turk killed himself last night with poison, immediately on getting his release, and he left a note for Mr. Wilbraham saying as he'd be much obliged if they'd have him put away, same as the woman he murdered in the old kickbag. What time? What time did he do it? Asked Johnson. 10 o'clock last night, sir, the warder said. So there's that. Victorian horror at its best. And, these things blow my mind because these were people that didn't have TV. They didn't have a lot to do. There was music, but instruments were expensive. There was all this stuff. And so this woman wrote this absolutely really good story. I mean, how many times have we told these same stories, right? Over anything, over a campfire when you're spending the night with your girlfriends when you're little, and everybody has a ghost story and everybody wants to be all giggly and pull the covers up. I don't know if boys do that too. I bet you do. But, it's just one of those things. And it's like, by doing paranormal investigation, we kind of find ways for ourselves to continue to experience these things. Hey, Melinda, good to see you. Thank you for being here. But, it's just so cool to me that these people 400 years ago were writing these stories. And, one of the things that Lori and I discovered when we were in Scotland, and, Melinda can vouch for these things too, there's a long history of ghost stories, and, people build on things. And, we were in Paris for a few days, and our friend Gary Knight is a walking tour person, and he took us through there. They have a Greyfriars in Paris, and it's a beautiful cemetery. It's gorgeous. And, one of the things that happened, there were floods. And, we've shown pictures and we've shared images of stuff. The drain grates in Paris have ghosts on them. Really, they do. And it's where, where they honored the people that drowned in the flood. And I believe that was in the 1400s, Lori. 1460, something like that. And it's still honored today. And it's so bizarre because we stayed in a hotel called Salutations. Gorgeous. And it was just such a bizarre history. There was a place across the road a bit, and it's called the Fair Maid House. Lori had some great experiences there. And it was really interesting because, there was actually a quote by the man who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that was up on one of the beams. And that just made my whole millennium to see that. But there were things that were, Lori, what was the explorer's name that had they had so much of his stuff, and it was, his snowshoes and his poles and, his survival gear. And there was so much there. They had maps that were from the 1600s, and you could just, the cartography was beautiful. I know the Fair Maid House, but the name of the explorer. But was it Admiral Byrd, that who had gone to Antarctica? And that was just amazing to me because it was some of the books were beautiful, but the cartography of these maps, and you could look at them and they were still accurate. So obviously, because the earth doesn't go away, but well, it does, but depends on the scenario. But it was just a fascinating thing for us. And when I sit here and I read these books and these stories, and this is not, the kit bag is not a story unlike what we tell now. It's not unlike what is written now. It was pretty gruesome, which surprised me. It really did. And that was their idea of something to do at Christmas, was to sit around and tell stories like this. And I love to read. Y'all may not like to hear me read, but I love to read. So when I started looking for these stories, and I was so excited that Mental Floss had done these as well, kind of the great minds run together. But it was so cool because I'm starting to look around, and I know that in England and Scotland and so many places, Ireland too, that this is a tradition. Melinda says that she feels like the energy in Scotland is due not only to the history, but the pride and love of country that still to this day runs strong in the Scottish people. And you've heard us say this, and she is saying this in chat, the land there has a totally different feel from anywhere else she's ever been. And I agree with that. Our country has had our own civil wars, and we had the Indian Wars, which thoroughly affected the area where I live. And there's a lot of places here where there were massacres, and I struggle with that. And then you go to the civil rights issues that were also in my area. And that was something that affected our family pretty strongly. We were not exempt from that in my town. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. And this is where there was a bombing and a child was killed in that bombing. And in fact, there were 10 little girls that were affected by that. And it's one of the hardest things to contemplate, because if you go to our airport, you are driving by where that child is buried. And it's something that this affects more than just the family. This affects the world that this is happening within. It's a terrible thing. And the way that this period seems to have dealt with it is very matter of fact. And I agree with Melinda that the energy there in Scotland is like no other. There's been, I've mentioned this before. I don't know if I've actually been quite upfront about it, but when I was at Culloden Battlefield, where over 1,400 Jacobites died there in this battle of Culloden, and less than 500 of the English were killed. It's because the English had guns, and The Jacobites did not. And they were being led by an Irishman that day. And with the odds that were so heavily against them, and with the English having guns, the Irishman told them to charge. And because they were Scots and they believed so heavily in what they were fighting for, they died. They charged right into gunfire, and it was a flat field. And so they died. And Rick McCullum and I were walking past the different, because they had them buried by clan. And so we were walking, and I got shot. There's no way to describe it, but it was right in my abdomen, and it was about yay big. Felt like probably a musket ball. I've seen them. It was about probably that size. I am not a physical medium. I do not have those experiences. I had 2 of them in Scotland. I scared Lori to death when we were at the Writers Museum. We were doing an investigation, and I had been in a room that had just documents and history in there and cases. And when I walked out, and it was terrible. I put my hand back because I thought, oh my God, I'm bleeding, and there was no blood. And so I'm just standing there, and Lori looks at me, and she's like, are you okay? I must have looked like I was going to pass out. She said I was really pale. But it was really tough. And so the energy in Scotland is like no other. I have been places. I mean, I've been all over our country, and I've been to Scotland 3 times. And this last one was beautiful. The second one was the one where I was doing all this physical mediumship kind of stuff that I'm like, no, don't want this. This is terrible. But Melinda says, do I feel like we as a nation tend to sweep our young history under the proverbial rug? I don't think so. I feel like probably with the Indian Wars, we do more so than anything else. I feel like with the civil rights thing, I live in the South, and I feel like we did a pretty good job of taking ownership of what happened. There's a lot of people that are like, surrender hell, whatever. But I really think that as a people, that there's only so much you can do to correct the wrongs that were done by your ancestors. And I feel like I was raised by very progressive minded people. And my attitude is not necessarily what some people in the South carry. And so I was taught that everybody has value. My dad worked in rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation. He was an executive director of a comprehensive cancer center. He was a director of a physical rehabilitation center for spinal cord injuries. He always, my whole life, we volunteered wherever there was a need. I still try to, and try to teach my children that too. But some of the history, no matter where you are, there's dark history. There are people that were, suppressed. There are people that were assholes. There are people that thought that they were better than anybody else because of their ancestry, not necessarily because of their color, but because of ancestry, titles, royalty, whatever. But, I feel like wherever you go, there has been horrific treatment of human to human everywhere in this world. There's a lot of it that still goes on in countries that we give a lot of money to as a nation and as people. You know, you shop on Amazon, you are supporting a communist regime. China is a communist country. They make everything. We buy it. So are you supporting the suppression of their people? Yeah. And by doing that, we are also preventing things being made here. And, you know, people can't afford to make the products, and then there you go. And there's also a lot, you know, Melinda said that she's gotten some really good audio at Culloden. I didn't have a chance. We walked out. We had just started walking through. We were with Liam and the Scottish Highland Paranormal Group. And Barry Fairburn was with us. And I mean, it was just crazy. And Lindsay was driving Rick and I around. It was just a lot of good times. And I don't know what to make of that. I would have liked the chance to gather evidence there instead of being the evidence there. But I think that I don't even know where Melinda, you got me into all of this. This is your fault. But I think that we do tend to, America is pretty straightforward about, yeah, this was bad. Yeah, we had to fight a war over this. Yeah, it could have been so much better. But people grew up thinking that it's just, you know, the way things are. It is not the way things are. It's the way we let them be. And I don't do politics. I love politics. I was a political science major, but I don't do politics on my show. And oh, Melinda, I am from a small group of Campbells. I'm a Kemp. My grandmother was a Kemp, so that's fun for me that you are too. But you know, it's just one of the horrors. But I wouldn't trade being who I am for anything, really. I like who I am. I'm a decent person. I try to be. I tried to raise decent people. I think I did a good job of that. I married a terrific person. But, you know, there's history everywhere that you go. And people are, you know, I don't know why. I don't know why the people were captured and, you know, their kinsmen, their rival tribes would sell them. I mean, people are not a commodity. They're not a commodity. By the way, Melinda, never say you're sorry. I love questions and I love conversation. And yeah, I think you're pretty special. So it's all good. But I do think that the fact that people thought that other people were a commodity, that will never sit right with anyone. It should never sit right with anyone. And my dad was very adamant about that too. So, but with the ghosts, you know, this is something that I would not have expected to be a Victorian thing. I mean, I've always heard that the Victorians were kind of funky, right? I mean, really, they were very funky. But it's just surprising, right? Because we think that we have we have all the horror movies. Like I said, my best guy friend is a horror actor. He's a stuntman, but he's a horror actor. He was Darkwolf. And, it's just like, no, I've never seen anything you've been in except for, one of the airplane movies. I saw that. But it's so funny because that's such a strong genre for for keeping people, in the theaters. And Melinda said people are predators. However, there are many good people to this day. I think that there are many good people to this day. And I think that because we have a lot more awareness, I do think that this is not political, this is realistic. I think that we allowed so many people over the last 4 years into our country without any knowledge of who they were. The border was open. People were just, here you are. And so now we don't know anything about, was there a criminal, people that would not have been allowed into our country based on their history are here. And there's a lot of stuff that now you have to find out who they are. And that's very hard to do. So I think that there's a strong possibility that, like the story that we just read, you have people that don't have a lot of compassion for humanity, because it is all about having compassion for other people. Not wanting to create pain goes a long way in preventing us from being criminals. I mean, compassion is important. And a lot of the people that came across that border were people that needed refuge. There's no doubt about that. But there were a lot of people that came across that border that were just looking for opportunity. And, not everybody views opportunity in the same way. So I think that's probably where a lot of the problems that different cities have been having originate. So hopefully we'll figure out who the predators are and get them gone. And we'll figure out who the people are that need protection from the predators are and get them safe. Because some of the stories that we hear about what's being done to some of these children, I mean, there's so many children that are lost, just lost. Nobody knows where they went. Nobody knows who had them. You hear stories about the people that needed to get other people, people that would take children in and then come back and get more children. And that's terrible. And we have been infiltrated. And, it's really compassion is one thing. We have compassion. We are a nation of immigrants. All of us, all of our history. I have a lot of Native American history, but I have a lot of European history as well. I had immigrants in my background. And it's how we built our country. And people were dying trying to get here because we were the land of opportunity. People came as indentured servants. People paid to bring them here, and then they worked for them until they paid off their passage. That's, that is legal immigration. And it was not peachy keen. It was tough crossing the ocean back then, but they did it. And they came through Ellis Island. They were proud to be registered. They were proud to be, coming here to work. They wanted to be able to bring their families, and they did. And, those are some badasses that came across in those boats. They were magnificent people. And the fact that that's our history, we are a nation of immigrants. There's nothing wrong with that. But you just have to do it the right way. And when you just open the border to every Tom, Dick, and Harry and Juan that comes over, it's just like, good God. We all saw the videos of those hotels and the apartments in Colorado where people were having their doors busted down and things like that. That's scary stuff. I don't know how those people were able to even sleep at all there. And you don't have a choice because you don't have money. You don't have a choice but to go home. And then that's what's waiting for you when you go home. I don't know how the soapbox got under my feet when I'm talking about scary Christmas stories. Sorry about that. But, but it is what it is. And we will eventually find a way to get the balance back because, you can't live constantly in a state of panic, of, anger. Everything balances out. It does. And, you have to bring hope. I think that we have to have compassion. And, that's where this all starts. You can't just automatically forget that we came as immigrants here. Melinda says her great-great-grandparents immigrated from Scotland. I had people that were Native Americans as well as, English and Scots and, a few other nations. And it's just one of those things that we're a nation of immigrants. And it's okay to still have immigration. We don't get to, completely shut our country down, but people just need to come here appropriately. There's nothing wrong with being an immigrant. But the difference is that our ancestors acclimated to our country as opposed to insisting that our country acclimate to them. It's all about balance. So hopefully we'll get a handle on it. But it's just one of those things that there's not a good answer. There is not right now a good answer. They're trying to find one. Hopefully it will come soon. But, I think that, we've got the flow working the way it's supposed to now. And now we just have to figure out who needs help and who is still supposed to be coming. It'll get there. It always does. Back in the day, it was harder to get here. So, yeah, she said compassion, integrity, honesty, values are essential to a thriving society from all sides. Yes. And if you're wanting to come here, you need to be exhibiting those too. So I know that for years, because there's been a lot of immigration before the gates were open. And it's just, my daughter dated a Panamanian for a lot of high school. And he was not here correctly. And he had to go home because he was in high school and he had to go home. And now he is really doing well with his life. He's still in Panama. Yes, I am. Melinda, I am a healer. How do you know that? So it doesn't usually show, but it's just, and, she wasn't dating him still when he had to go home, but his visa had expired. He was a kid. And so there's that. Sometimes it happens to people who are good people, and the bad people just hide. So there's that. I don't even know how this soapbox got under my feet. I hate when that happens. But you want to hear about Krampus? Melinda, you probably know about Krampus. But I've always heard about Krampus. I have Krampus night, and I just think it's wild because it's kind of like the Grinch, right? He's like the bad Santa, but it's in the Central and Eastern Alpine folkloric tradition. It's anthropomorphic figure. That's the word. But it's said to accompany St. Nicholas on visits to children during the night of December 5th, Krampus night, immediately before the feast of St. Nicholas on December 6th. And in that tradition, okay, St. Nicholas rewards well-behaved children with gifts, while Krampus punishes badly behaved children with birch rods. He brought them switches, literally. And I think that's so funny because my grandma used to tell me that I was going to get a sack full of switches. How mean was that? I'm a nice person. But it says that the origin of the figure is unclear. Some folklorists think that they postulated that it may have been, have pre-Christian origins, although historians generally consider that unlikely as it's not attested to until the 16th century. And traditional parades and events such as the Krampus Run, some young men dressed as Krampus attempting to scare the audience with their antics. So Krampus is featured on holiday greeting cards, and the figure has been imported into pop culture around the world and has appeared in movies, TV shows, and everything. But it's really interesting because he's got horns, he's got fur, depending on where you go. And, in the 17th century, Krampus was, considered to be Saint Nick's helper. And because that's a saint, it wasn't logical or deemed saintly behavior for Nicholas to deliver punishments. So therefore, he had to have a helper that could do that. And so Krampus, or farmhand Rupert, whatever, at that time would go down the chimney to punish the naughty children. So Krampus served St. Nicholas in that role. And it's really funny. This, to me, is really funny. And after the 1932 election in Austria, the Krampus tradition was prohibited by the Dollfuss regime under the clerical fascist Fatherland Front and the Christian Social Party. And then in the 1950s, the government of Austria distributed pamphlets titled "Krampus is an Evil Man," for fear that encounters with Krampus might damage children's mental health. They thought this was real. Towards the end of the century, a popular resurgence of Krampus celebrations occurred and continues today. And the Krampus tradition is being revived in Bavaria as well, along with the local artistic tradition of hand-carved wooden masks. Love to have one of those hand-carved wooden masks. But and Although Krampus appears in many variations, most share some common physical characteristics. He's hairy, horned, usually brown or black, has 1 foot with cloven hooves of a goat. His long, pointed tongue lolls out, and he has fangs. So he carries chains thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian church. He thrashes the chains for dramatic effect. The chains are sometimes accompanied with bells of various sizes. He will carry a bundle of birch branches with which he occasionally swats children. The birch branches are replaced with a whip in some representations. Where they have the branches, I don't know. Rather not have either. But, and on the eve before St. Nicholas Day, the 6th of December, Krampus travels together with St. Nick with a sack or a basket strapped to his back. This is to cart off evil children for drowning, eating, or transport to hell. Some of the older versions make mention of naughty children being put in the bag and taken away. This quality can be found in other companions of St. Nicholas, such as Swartay Piet. What do you think of that? I mean, this is just like, oh dear heavens, I do not want to be a friend of Krampus. That's just wrong. So this is probably who I had the most fun with, because I just thought that, I don't know. I just thought this was so interesting. But the Santa's other name, Saint Nick, is derived from Saint Nicholas, the mythical character from Europe that our beloved Santa was based on. So Krampus is also known as Santa's shadow due to his stark contrast to the joy and smiles. But he's pretty freaky. And some of the pictures that I have seen when I was doing this research were freaking me out. They are not child friendly. I don't think they're child friendly. If I were a kid, I would have nightmares about this guy. He is so negative. I mean, he's really, really, really negative. And he originated in the Alps, but his legend has spread everywhere. In recent decades, he surged in global popularity, becoming the symbol of a dark holiday folklore embraced by fans of horror, mythology, and offbeat celebrations. I'm offbeat. I don't like that. But from across Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Croatia, Krampus runs draw thousands of spectators, with each region adding its own style and rituals. Some parades favor playful antics, while others lean into the monstrous, featuring smoke, fire, and costume performers who look like they walk straight out of a nightmare. That's true. I saw some of them. And in the U.S., Krampus has become a pop culture icon. Cities such as LA, Philadelphia, and Louisville, Kentucky, now host Krampus festivals, complete with costume contests, winter markets, and dramatic reenactments of alpine traditions. Does that include the sack full of switches? Krampus has also appeared in films, art, comics, and haunted attractions. That's true. I've worked in one. He's often portrayed as the anti-Santa, an embodiment of the season's darker, older spirit. And even as the legend evolves, the heart of Krampus remains unchanged. He's a reminder that winter once represented both celebration and fear, light and shadow. But you always have the yin and the yang. In the flickering torchlight of Krampus Nacht, the ancient story still lives. Better behave, or the Christmas demon may find you before St. Nick does. I just think that's so funky. And I just think it's fun. And part of this is on that U.S. Ghost Adventures. It's not the show, okay? But Ghost Adventures, usghostadventures.com, haunted stories. And I'm not trying to promote these people because I don't know them. Research them before you do anything with them. Trust me, I've been on a bad tour. You don't want to deal with those people. But, it's just one of those things that I was amazed. I did not know the extent of the Krampus history. And I do know that he's worse than the Grinch. I do know the Grinch. I've been the Grinch before. But Melinda says that she feels like Krampus was developed strictly as a tool to promote fear in children, too. Well, yes, because I don't want a sack full of switches. And I don't know about you, but I have still been threatened with a sack full of switches by, my grown-ups on occasion, which blew my mind. And I don't want that. Oh, hi, Cat Ward. You're in Australia? That's so nice to meet you. I have a friend, Cat Ward, who lives in Canada. So it's a small world. Are you the same, Cat Ward? Where are you in Australia? That's very nice. But at any rate, I just think that this is one of the most fun shows that I've done. And I try to do something periodically so that, I just get to share with y'all and get to talk with y'all. And some of these stories to me, I wanted to tell y'all also this Ghost Summons by Ada Boyson is Buisson. That's something that you should check out. The Shadow by Edith Nesbit. She's Victorian. She was hers is titled The Shadow, but she's also done a lot of children's stories, including Five Children in It and The Railway Children. And now I love The Railway Children, and my children read those. So that's who wrote that book. But the All Souls by Edith Wharton, I think that's something that is pretty good too. There's so many. I did not realize that there were this many like alternative Christmas books, like The Dark Side of Christmas, maybe. But I guess that's pretty interesting because I didn't get exposed to a lot of that. I did get threatened with some of these characters when my grandmother read a lot. But I did get threatened with some of these things. But to me, it's just really a unexpected and fun thing to play with a little bit. It's not the best thing to threaten a child with, but it's something that I really had a great grandmother who knew how much I read and knew that I was going to know a lot of this stuff. And so she used it against me. Nothing wrong with that. Now, I want to read you this story. This one really is a short story. And it's called Dark Christmas. It's by Jeanette Winterson. And it's the lead in is renting a remote house for the holidays sounds idyllic, but not in the Stone Gods author Jean Winterson's haunting tale. So I'll just whiz right through this. We had borrowed the house from a friend none of us seemed to know. The high-fallen house stood on an eminence overlooking the sea. It was a square Victorian gentleman's residence. The large bay windows looked down through the pines toward the shore. 6 stone steps led the visitor up to the double front door, where a Gothic bell pull released a loud, mournful clang deep into the distances of the house. Laurel lined the drive. The stable block was disused. The walled garden had been locked up in 1914 when the gardeners went to war. Only one had returned. I had been warned that the high brick wall enclosing the garden was unsafe. As I passed it slowly in the car, I saw a faded notice falling off the paint-filled door. Do not enter. I was the first to arrive. My friends were following by train, and I was to collect them the next day, and then we would settle down to Christmas. I had driven from Bristol, and I was tired. There was a Christmas tree roped on the top of my 4x4 and a trunk load of provisions. We were not near any town, but the housekeeper had left stacked wood to build a fire, and I had brought a shepherd's pie and a bottle of wine for my first night. I don't know how to say that word. The kitchen was cheerful enough once I got the fire going and the radio playing while I unpacked our festive supplies. I checked my phone. No signal. Still, I knew the time of the train tomorrow, and it was a relief to feel that the world had gone away. I put my food in the oven to heat up, poured a glass of wine, and went upstairs to find myself a bedroom. The first landing had 3 bedrooms leading off it. Each had a moth-eaten rug, a metal bed, and a mahogany chest of drawers. At the far end of the landing was a second set of stairs up to the attic floor. I am not romantic about maids' rooms or nurseries, and there was something about that second set of stairs that made me hesitate. The landing was bright in the sudden way of late sun on a winter's afternoon, yet the light ended abruptly at the foot of the stairs, as though it couldn't go any farther. I didn't want to be near that set of stairs, so I chose the room at the front of the house. As I went to bring up my bag, the house bell started to ring. It jerked metallic hammers, its jerky metallic hammers sounding somewhere in the guts of the house. I was surprised, but not alarmed. I expected the housekeeper. I opened the door, and there was no one there. I went down the steps and looked around. I admit I was frightened. The night was clear and soundless. There was no car in the distance, no footsteps walking away. Determined to conquer my fear, I walked round a little bit. Then, turning back to the house, I saw it. The bell wire ran along the side of the house under a sheltering gutter. Perhaps 30 or 40 bats were dangling upside down. Sorry, I jumped. Under the sheltering gutter. Perhaps 30 or 40 bats were dangling upside down on the vibrating wire. The same number swooped out and swerved in a dark mass. Obviously, their movement on the wire had set off the bell. I liked bats. Clever bats. Good. Now supper. I ate. I drank. I wondered why life is so hard and why love is so hard and life is so short. I went to bed. The room was warmer now, and I was ready to sleep. The sounds of the sea ebbed into the flow of my dreams. I woke from a dead sleep and dead darkness to hear. What? What can I hear? It sounded like a ball bearing or a marble rolling on the bare floor above my head. It rolled hard on hard, then hit the wall. Then it rolled again in the other direction. This might not have mattered, except that the other direction was upwards. Things come loose and roll downwards, but they cannot come loose and roll up unless someone. That thought was so unwelcome, I dismissed it along with the law of gravity. Whatever was rolling over my head must be a natural dislodging. The house was draughty and unused. The attics were under the eaves where any kind of weather might get in. Weather or an animal. Remember the bats? I pulled the covers up to my eyebrows and pretended not to listen. There it was again. Hard, on hit, on pause, on roll. I waited for sleep, waited for daylight. We were lucky, even the worst of us, because daylight comes. It was a brooding day, that 21st of December, the shortest day of the year. Coffee, totem, car keys. Shouldn't I just check the attic? The second set of stairs was narrow, a servant's staircase. It led to a lath and plaster corridor, barely a shoulder width wide. I started coughing. Breathing was difficult. Damp had dropped the plaster in thick, crumbling heaps on the floorboards. As below, there were 3 doors. 2 were closed. The door to the room above my room was ajar. I made myself go forward. The room was under the eaves, as I had guessed. The floor was rough. There was no bed, only a washstand and clothes rail. What surprised me was the nativity scene in the corner. Standing about 2 feet tall, it was more like a doll's house than a Christmas decoration. Inside the front open stable stood the animals, the shepherds, the crib, Joseph. Above the roof, on a bit of wire, was a battered star. It was old, handmade in a workmanlike but not craftsmanlike sort of way, the painted wood now rubbed and faded like pigments of time. I thought I would carry it downstairs and put it by our Christmas tree. It must have been made for the children when there were children here. I stuffed my pockets with the figures and animals and left quickly, leaving the door open. I had to set off for the station. Stephen and Susie would help me with the rest later. As soon as I was out of the house, my lungs felt clear again. It must be the plaster dust. The drive to the station was along the coast ride. Lonely and unyielding, the road turned into a series of blind bends and tight corners. I met no one and I saw no one. Gulls circled over the sea. The station itself was a simple shelter on a long single track. There were no information boards. I checked my phone. No signal. At last the train appeared distantly down the track. I was excited. Memories of visiting my father as a child when he was stationed at his RAF base give me a rush of pleasure whenever I travel by train or come to meet one. The train slowed and halted. The guard stood down for a moment. I watched the doors. It wasn't a big train, this branch line train, but none of the doors opened. I waved at the guard who came over. I'm meeting my friends. He shook his head. Train's empty. Next stop is the end of the line. I was confused. Had they gotten off at an earlier stop? I described them. The guard shook his head again. I noticed strangers. They would have boarded at Carlisle, asked me where to get off. Always do. Is there another train before tomorrow? One a day, and that's your lot. But more than anybody else needs in a place like this. Where are you staying? High Fallen House. Do you know it? Okay. We all do. He looked as if he were about to say something else. Instead, he blew his whistle. The empty train pulled away, leaving me staring down the long track, watching the red light like a warning. I needed to get a signal on my phone. I drove on past the station, following the steep hill, hoping some height would connect me with the rest of the world. At the top of the hill, I stopped the car and got out, pulling on the collar of my coat. The first snow hit my face with insistence, sharp and painful like little bites. I looked out across the whitening bay. That must be High Fallen House, but what's that? 2 figures walking on the beach. Is it Stephen and Susie? Had they driven here after all? Then, as I strained my eyes against the deceit of distance, I realized that the second figure was much smaller than the first. They were walking purposefully toward the house. When I arrived back, it was nearly dark. I put on the lights, blew the fire into a blaze. There was no sign of the mysterious couple I'd seen from the hill. Perhaps it had been the housekeeper and her daughter come to make sure that everything was all right. I had a telephone number for Mrs. Wormwood. There you go. But without a signal, I could not call her. The snow was thickening in windy swirls. Relax. Have a whiskey. I leaned on the warm kitchen range with my whiskey in hand. The wooden figures I had brought down from the attic were lying on the kitchen table. I should go up and get the stable. I don't want to. I bounded up the first set of stairs, using energy to force out unease. At my bedroom, I put on the light. That felt better. The second set of stairs stood in shadow at the end of the long landing. I felt that constriction in my lungs again. Why am I holding onto the handrail like an old man? I could see that the only light to the attic was at the top of the stairs. I found the round black bakelite switch. I flipped down the nipple. The single bulb lit up reluctantly. The room was straight ahead. The door was closed. Hadn't I left it open? I turned the handle and stood in the doorway. The room dimly lit by the light from the stairs. Washstand, nativity, clothes rail. On the clothes rail was a child's dress. I hadn't noticed that before. I suppose I'd been in a hurry. Putting aside my misgivings, I went in purposefully and bent down to pick up the wooden nativity. It was heavy, and I had just got it secure in my arms when the landing light went out. Hello, who's there? There's someone breathing like they can barely breathe, not faint, struggling for breath. I mustn't turn around because whoever or whatever it is behind me. I stood still for a moment, steadying my nerve. Then I shuffled forward toward the edge of the light coming up from downstairs. At the doorway, I heard a step behind me, lost my balance, and put out a hand to steady myself. My hand gripped something wet, the clothes rail. That must be the dress. My heart was overbeating. Don't panic. Fake light, bad wiring, strange house, darkness, aloneness. But you're not alone, are you? Back in the kitchen with whiskey, Radio 4, and pasta boiling, I examined the dress. It was for a small child, and it was hand-knitted. The wool was smelly and sopping. I washed it out and left it hanging over the sink to drip. I guess there must be a hole in the roof, and the dress had been soaking up the rain for a long time. I ate my supper, tried to read, told myself it had been nothing, nothing at all. It was only 8 p.m. I didn't want to go to bed, though the snow outside was like a quilt. I decided to arrange the nativity. The crib was there, but it was empty. There was no Christ child, and there was no Mary. Had I dropped them in the dark room? I hadn't heard anything fall. And these wooden figures are 6 inches tall. Joseph was wearing a woolen tunic, but his wooden legs had painted puttees. I pulled off the tunic. Underneath the wooden, Joseph wore a painted uniform. First World War. When I turned him around, there was a gash in his back like a stab wound. My phone beeped. I dropped Joseph, grabbed the phone. It was a text message from Susie. Trying to call you, leave tomorrow. I pressed call, nothing. I tried to send a text, nothing. But what did it matter? I felt relief and calm. They'd been delayed, that was all. I sat down again with the nativity. Perhaps the missing figures were inside. I put out my hand. My fingers closed around a metal object. It was a small iron key with a hoop top. Maybe it was the key to the attic door. I tell you what, this just gets wild. Outside, snow had fallen, snow on snow. The sky had cleared, the moon sped above the sea. I had gone to bed and was deep asleep when I heard it clearly, above me. Footsteps, pacing, down the room, hesitate, turn, return. I lay in bed, staring blindly at the blind ceiling. Why do we open our eyes when we can't see anything? And what was there to see? I don't believe in ghosts. I wanted to put on the light, but what if the light didn't come on? What would be worse in the darkness? I had not chosen that darkness. I was choosing? It would be worse in the darkness, but it would be worse. I sat up in bed and pulled back the curtain a little. The moon had been bright tonight. Surely it would be light. There was light. Outside the house, hand in hand, stood the still and silent figures of a mother and child. I didn't sleep again till daylight, and when I slept and woke again, it was almost midday, and already the light was lowering. Hurrying to get the coffee, I saw the dress was gone. Get out of the house. I set off for the station. There was an air frost that had coated the trees in glittering white. On the road, there were no car tracks, no noise but the roar and drop of the sea. I moved slowly and saw no one. At the station, I waited. I waited some time past the time until the train whistled on the track. The train stopped. The guard got down and saw me. He said, "There's no one at all." I thought I would cry. I took out my mute phone. I flashed up the message, "Trying to call you, leave tomorrow." The guard looked at it. "Happen it's you who should be leaving. There's no more trains past Carlisle now until the 27th. Tomorrow was the last, and that's been canceled due to weather." I gave him the number. "Will you call my friends and tell them I'm on my way?" On the slow journey back, I filled my mind with my departure. It would be slow and dangerous to travel at night, but I would not consider another night alone. Or not alone. All I had to do was manage 40 miles to Itchbarn. There was a pub and a guest house and remote but normal life. And that is where I'm going to stop that because it gets better. But this is called, I may never find out, Ghost Stories in Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. It's going to be better. You need to go and read it. It's amazing. Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. Go read it. It's great. I am so glad that you've been here, Melinda. It's been great to see you. And Kat, it's great to see you too. Oh my gosh, you're 41 Celsius? You do live in Victoria. That is so amazing. Thank you for being here. And I am thrilled. Yeah, I hope that y'all enjoyed this. It's been interesting. A little political talk, but not too much. And Melinda, it's been great to see you here in chat. Lori, I love you. And I will talk to you later. Everybody, be blessed and just enjoy your time. I'm so blessed to be able to do this. And I hope that you are with people that you love. And if you can't be with them, just love them harder. And I will see you next time, same cat channel. Thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate you. Good night.